Team Wilpers. It's Coach Lorri Lown. For those who don't know me, I am one of the cycling coaches and bike fitters with Team Wilpers. I also coach the Peloton class challenges. And joining me today is Ava Fagan, who is our strength and conditioning coach. And we're going to do some intros in a minute. Let me just start out with a couple of bits of business, Ava. First, I have a couple of athlete shout outs today. Debbie Kirkhouse, I'm really proud of you. You had the courage to go join your first group gravel ride with the New York City Gravel Riders. And she was the only woman, which is always a little scary and intimidating. And then Christy Wilkie did her very first triathlon this weekend. I think I put an extra syllable in there, sorry. And she raced a sprint and she was texting me and saying, I can't wait to do more. I've got all these races I want to do next year.
Amazing.
And longer and longer. I'm hearing all the audio again.
Oh no.
There we go. Anyways, and then one more, Leah Bulow. Leah, congratulations. She's been working on her cadence and bringing her cadence up on the bike, and she got it up to 100 as her average cadence on Christian Vandevelde's ride. So that's a big deal, training ourselves to be metabolically flexible to pedal both low cadences and high cadences. So shout out to y'all this week. Here we are, the last week of the challenge, and I know you guys have had some really exciting rides. This week is all about fitness, but freshness. So you'll notice the rides were a lot shorter this week. We want to keep the intensity up. Saturday is your power profile, and that should be really exciting. How do we execute the power profile class? As you know, we don't want to follow the cues during the short, hard efforts. I want you to go for it. What's the worst that could happen? You could fail. But that's okay. You could also succeed. So we will work on that on Saturday. You're going to go for your hard efforts. And I think y'all will be very pleasantly surprised to see the progress you've made over the last 4 weeks. Good morning, Amy Murphy. Thank you for joining us today. Anyways, today I wanted to chat with Ava. And one of the very interesting topics to me is how do we incorporate strength into endurance training? Ava, I started bike racing about 20 years ago. And at that time, we had a really prevalent feeling in the endurance sport industry that we should only strength train in this little tiny window of 3 or 4 months each year because it would fatigue us too much for our competition. So we now know that that is not correct. And as a
we have grown beyond that.
I regret all these years of not doing strength training. So I thought it would be awesome to bring you in. I have some questions for you as well from our group members, but I thought we would start just with an intro from you. What's your background? What do you do? How did you get there?
Okay.
What were your sports?
All right. Can you hear me okay? Is everybody okay? Okay. Can you hear me? Hello? I'll try this.
Yeah.
Okay. I was scared nobody can hear me for a minute. Okay. We're good. So the AirPods were not working. All right. So my intro, my name is Ava. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I was actually a ballet dancer for a long time, roughly 20-ish years. When I was 18, I went to college at Indiana University. I majored in dance, and then I moved to LA. I tried to dance there, and I was like, I don't really love this as much as I love working out. So I really just fell out of love with it. That's like the best way to describe it. And I was going to the gym and going to dance classes to like get exercise as opposed to really perform in the art, so to say. So I went back to school and I really wanted to graduate on time, which was like my biggest regret of all time. Like, who cares how long it takes you to graduate? Anyway, I got my degree. I moved to New York City and I worked. It's kind of a funny story. I worked for this music manager because I thought I wanted to be like on that part of dance and entertainment. And he fired me because I was late to work because I was at the gym in the morning and like would be. So here we are. So I then got my personal training certification and I started working at a gym in New York City, which is how I met John and his wife, Hannah. And I started personal training there. And then I really grew this desire and like urge and passion to work with athletes. So COVID hit and I decided to get my CSCS, which is your certified strength and conditioning coach through the National Strength and Conditioning Coach Association. And once I passed that, I was able to then work with athletes. That's what you need to work with athletes. So I got an internship at Rutgers University. I was working over the summer with their athletic department, mostly basketball and wrestling and field hockey and soccer, who was there over the summer. And then a job opened up at Cleveland State. And so I came home and I'm now the assistant director of sports performance here at Cleveland State, but that's only like one hat that I have in my strength and conditioning life. I'm obviously also a team Wilpers strength coach, but full time I work here at Cleveland State. I work with men's lacrosse, men's wrestling, women's tennis, men's and women's swim and dive, and women's soccer. And then I also obviously work with all of our endurance running and cycling athletes. And I have a few just strength athletes as well through Team Wilpers. And I run my own little personal training business here in Cleveland as well.
That's awesome.
I do a lot of things.
Yeah. So, an interesting question that I have is how unusual is it for a woman to be a strength and conditioning coach for a men's sport?
It's a really good question. So it's funny. Sometimes I feel like it's very unusual. And when I first, I started at Cleveland State as kind of like a part-time coach intern, and I had different sports. I worked with track and field. We only have women's here, and cross country. I worked with fencing. I worked with men's tennis, and I was working with some of the teams that were a little bit smaller, or didn't require like nearly as much like oomph in the weight room. And then I got promoted to this assistant director job, and they immediately were like, "You're going to have wrestling and men's lacrosse," and I was like, whoa. And I kind of knew that would happen. And at first I was really anxious about it. And then I was like, I don't know, like, I have nothing to do with this.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like what I program and how I coach. And my boss here always tells me it's not about what you program, it's how you coach it. So, and that obviously has nothing to do with me being a woman. And the more I did research on the field, and now I'm a part of the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association. And when we go to that conference every year, there's like a large women's breakfast that now has like over 150 women at it every year. And you hear of so many of those women, working with men's sports. And some of our best women in the field right now work with men's basketball. You know what I mean? So we're growing. And there's challenges with it. I think sometimes they want like the 250-pound, like bulky, bald dude to walk into the weight room and like, slap them on the head and the shoulders, like before they get under the bar. And I think sometimes they want that, but I would also rather them have a really smart strength coach who can get them to feel good and reduce their risk of injuries on the field. And so,
Yeah.
I think I bring my own personal goodness, so to say, to the weight
I
room.
think we're in a good place for that as well. I know when I started
Yeah.
coaching 23 years ago, first of all, there were a lot of people who were like, oh, how can you be a coach who weren't a pro bike racer? I was just a girl who liked
Yeah.
bikes, but I had a background in teaching and I had taught at the university level and in various capacities with the Red Cross and Girl Scouts and corporate. But also, who would want to race for me? And how will you ever coach men? And so I started a women's organization. That was kind of my in at that point. But then I found I proved myself to the cycling community as a whole. And
Right.
now there's never a question. It's like, yeah, she knows her stuff. And
Yeah.
this is what she
It's
does.
funny, I know we'll get into mobility a little bit later because we have that planned, but what's interesting is my dance background actually and brings a lot of what's very relevant in the strength and conditioning community right now, which is mobility and stability and preventing injuries through that type of work. And I think I have this a little bit more of that like mobility and how the body can stay mobile and how your hips work and things like that just from my ballet and dance background. And so it's particularly for men's lacrosse, which people don't really know, but mimics football in a lot of ways. Like our lacrosse guys play lacrosse in the spring and football in the fall sometimes when they're in
Uh,
high school. And so, that stuff comes in handy. And so it's different pieces and parts of your background, regardless of your gender, that really do bring
mhm. Well, and
everything
I
together.
was wondering about one other question that came up, which is it hard to program for a sport that you haven't participated in?
That's a great question. The more you watch it and the more you learn about the sport, obviously the better it will, the more it will benefit the athletes because they really do love to hear, for swimming particular, like when I started to like really understand the strokes, and I like got in the pool with the coach and like did them,
Yeah.
then, and I could say, when you guys do breaststroke or we do this in order to be quicker when you like turn on, push off the wall or when you push off the blocks, like that type of language obviously helps.
Mhm.
I have to say, and like John, if he listens to this, will like die laughing. I hate running, like hate running. but I trained for a half marathon because he told me to. And he helped me do it. And an old Team Wilpers coach, Sam, was my coach, and I did it, and I ran the half marathon. And I have to say, I will never do it again, but
Never
it
say never.
did it never, ever, ever, but it did help me like really have this understanding of running and what's required and like how my hips started to hurt and how your hips and your pelvis start to move as you run and like
Mhm.
how you can prevent that through strength training. So yes, it helps, but I definitely don't think it's necessary because at the end of the day, what you really want to do is minimize. We do like a needs analysis,
Mhm.
like what do they need? How should we incorporate it? And so as long as you know the basic movement patterns of the sport and you understand what injuries are go along with each sport. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like tennis players have shoulder things and soccer players like definitely need like more like they tend to have hamstring injuries or ACL injuries. So as long as you know that and then you know how to prevent said injury, that's
Mhm.
really where it becomes important. But I have started to take tennis lessons from one of the tennis players because my fiance is like a diehard tennis fan and I've never done it and his dream in life is for us to just play tennis together one day. And so my like wedding present to him is taking tennis lessons from one of the girls and she was like, this is probably so great for you. And
Yeah.
I was
Well, and as you know, different sport, like I participate in linear sports.
like,
I
sure,
run, I ride a bike, my
sure,
body moves in the sagittal plane all the
sure.
time.
Yes,
I'm not real good at lateral stuff.
yes.
And trail running was good for me because as a runner, having, I call
You
it
have
fancy,
to like,
right? Having to navigate through rocks and uphills and downhills and around
yes,
roots and stuff. And I thought that was great. And it was great for building up glute med, I think, and
yeah,
getting that stability, which then transferred to the bike and helped me in that respect.
yes, yes. I remember actually I was starting to get my CSCS and I was still at Body Space Fitness, which was the gym I worked at in New York. And our owner and boss, Kelvin, who trains John, was training John and he was doing these like side to side slider lateral movements. And the owner and my mentor was trying to like get me in the mindset of like sport and athlete as I was, studying for this exam. And he was like, Ava, like from across the room, why am I having John do lateral movement? I don't
Right.
know why that like stuck with me. And I was like, because he never does
Right.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I always joke I can do anything with my quads. I could open a jar with my quads if I had to,
Right.
but ask me to use like hamstrings. Or don't we won't even go. I'm
Yeah.
racing nationals on the 8th, gravel nationals, and on the 10th, I am signed up to start working with a personal trainer because I feel weak. And I feel like the old lady who can't
There you
get
go.
off the floor or open a jar or reach a thing. And I'm like, okay,
There
this
you go.
fall, I'm going to create this pattern in my off season and I'm going to maintain the rest of the year so I stay strong because, as you
Yeah.
know, muscle mass loss and bone density loss at this age is significant for both men and women. But
It's a big thing. We'll talk about that.
yeah. So that's a good segue, though. What are the different types of strength training? Because people think strength is all one thing, but it's really not.
No, I mean, I think in general, there's different modes of strength training and obviously different
Mhm.
ways to progress your strength training. I think people generally see it. Obviously, putting external load on your muscles is really what's going to help them grow. And there's like so much little scientific bits and pieces that we can get into, but that external load obviously really helps. But sometimes that external load comes by way of stability and comes by the way of like body weight exercises, like a plank. You know what I mean? So in which your muscles can grow and can build strength, not just by means of like adding a dumbbell or adding so on and so forth. So if that's what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously different types of strength training just come in the different programming, you know what I mean? And the different ways, there's so much going on in strength and conditioning right now with
Mhm.
velocity based training.
Right.
And it obviously requires a lot of technology, which we don't even have at Cleveland State, but you're still able to do it. You're still able to like watch an athlete and say like, okay, the faster you do that squat jump or the more high you jump in that squat jump, the more powerful you're going to be in your runs. And so there's so much that goes in with it, and that's why strength and conditioning isn't like a great term for it anymore, and a lot of programs go by sports performance. We
Hmm.
personally do. I should start saying that when I say that I'm
Good.
sports performance. So because it is not just about that external load, it's also about performing in your sport by means of doing exercises in the weight room or by means of doing exercises outside of the confines of that sport.
Right. So there's a significant difference between a personal trainer and a strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah.
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 And it probably drives you
This
nuts.
I could talk
People are
about
like,
for 4.5 years.
yeah.
um what's funny, I never really, it depends of like what hat I'm wearing during the day and what I use. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. Like that's what I am. I don't really call myself a personal trainer, though I do personal training.
Correct.
So I have I mean, including, I would say, like, including our team Wilpers clients and athletes, I train close to 20 people on on a
Mhm.
weekly basis. That is personal training. It's me like customizing and individualizing a plan for them, and either in person or online, helping that. With that said, I would say I am a strength and conditioning coach, but from the collegiate side and from the pro athlete side, strength and conditioning, it helps explain what I do a little bit more.
Right.
And especially because I don't write personal programs for my athletes at Cleveland State, but I obviously do for my athletes for Team Wilpers. So like, I think also it's very mainstream to say like I have a personal trainer. Depending on what certifications that personal trainer has, you
Mhm.
might just have a personal trainer. You know what I
Right.
mean? But and my I'm sure my clients say like I have a personal trainer, but you know, the degrees that go beyond what I have, but I don't even think I have my CPT anymore. I have a strength and conditioning. I probably expired. I have a strength and conditioning coach certification. I have through 2 organizations, and I have my master's in exercise science. Like there's just so
Mhm.
much more, that it entails.
Right.
Good morning, Maggie. I love these chats.
I know. Amy and Maggie are pretty regulars on this, and I appreciate them very
Love
much
it.
because I'm like, okay, it's still working because low tech Lori is always worried. The videos, I keep
Right.
looking. I'm like, is it still going? So
Right.
let's talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of how do we incorporate strength training into an endurance program?
Yeah, so it is a challenge. I'll say that like volume becomes the issue.
Yeah.
Um, it really becomes the issue. And I think John and I have had this like talk so many times about like, cycling and run coaches love to say harder days hard and easy days easy. But
Mhm.
when the strength coach sees volume, we see hard. You know what I mean? And
Right.
we see volume. I'll say that. Like there's hard and high intensity, obviously, but we see volume. So when they if that's but that's considered an easy day, like a low and slow run or ride is considered an easy day in the endurance world. But to me, it's considered super high volume, and super high volume in like the strength world typically means that it's going to induce soreness, and it's
Right.
going to, require more recovery, and so on and so forth. So those weekend ride and runs, they say like, should I do a strength training session in conjunction with that because it's an easier day and like whatever? And I'm like, no. So there's a lot of ins and outs. What I will say, it's very dependent on the athlete themselves.
Yeah.
If you are going to do the strength training and the endurance ride or run back to back, I often say to do them like on opposite ends of the day.
Mhm.
And I usually do say to have, if you're doing like speed work and you're doing high intensity, low volume, that's a pretty good day to do your strength training, because then your easy days are pretty easy. But again, like it's going to depend on the person and the time that they have. Most of the clients that we work with here at Team Wilpers are like real, live, living, working people
Right.
who, it's they
It's
don't just do this
hard.
all day.
I
They
train
work. So it's
16 to 20 hours a week on the bike, and I work probably 60 hours a week between all
exactly,
the various, coaching things
exactly.
that I do.
It is a part-time job. So,
It
um,
is.
yeah, we
And I'm
incorporate it.
like
I mean,
down this weekend. That was a big thing. I took a day off. Had a 5 hour ride on the schedule on Sunday, and I was like, I was in tears twice last week during workouts, which should have told me something, right?
sure.
And I dreaded getting on the bike. I kept procrastinating every day. I would put it off toward the end of the day, and I was like, that's also telling me something. And I had 2 days off in a row, Sunday and Monday. And Sunday I wasn't working, and I was able to do all the things I haven't done all season because
It's
I
ama-
this
it's
huge bump.
amazing.
Yeah. And I was like, and I do think for masters athletes, having that block of 5 days on, 2 days off can actually work pretty well.
Yeah, it's huge. And so I also think, when you say how do you incorporate it, I typically really try to make those strength workouts like short and sweet. Let's try to pack as much in there as we can in those 20
Yeah.
to 30 minutes, so that if you do need to back them up, like, ride to strength, that it doesn't feel like that long of a commitment. But also there's this factor of like, if you strength, it's like anything else. If you only rode once a week, would you get much better? Probably
No,
not. You know what I mean? So if
you
you only
just get
strength train
fatigued.
once a week, you're not going to see benefit. And then obviously the more you ride, the more, improvement that you get. So same goes with strength training. And obviously depending on your goal, the more you strength train, the more benefit you're going to see from it.
Right.
No one's asking them to do 5 days a week, but if we can at least get two in, that's a win. So we incorporate it on days that, the answer is days that we're not in high volume.
Hmm.
and days that are not like super, super, super high intensity
Right.
in terms of running and riding.
That's really good. And the other thing that you said that I thought was encouraging was 20 minutes. Because a lot of us think
Oh
of
yeah.
the exercise blocks of, oh, I have to go and lift for an hour or 90 minutes or whatever.
No.
And it's like, okay, what am I doing that's taking an hour? Is it a type of strength? Am I doing heavy, heavy lifting and I need a long recovery between sets, or
Sometimes.
20 minutes would
Yeah.
work? And that's encouraging.
Sometimes. Yeah. Yeah. And I say this a lot to personal training clients who aren't endurance, adult athletes by any means, but there's like this notion that people need to like, if they don't get on the Peloton for 45 minutes, then like it wasn't a workout.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm so confused. Like do a 15-minute ride.
Right.
Like it's more than you would have done if you didn't do anything at all. So, it's
Yeah.
we need to like bash this whole like hour and nothing,
Right.
unless you're an endurance athlete and you have to be doing something for an hour. But like we have to bash that kind of mentality, and particularly with strength.
Well, and I also see it with outdoor cyclists. It's like, oh, if it wasn't 4 hours, it didn't matter. And it's like, yes, it does. And when we're
Who has the
beginning the
time?
sport, it's the consistency. It's the day after day after day, even for half an hour, 45 minutes,
Yeah,
that builds up over time, and it builds the biomechanics. It builds the skill set. It builds
exactly.
the endurance. And it doesn't have to be long. The other concept I like is exercise snacks. I always think of, I have
Yeah.
meals during the day and I have snacks, right? I'll have a meal, a snack, a meal, a snack. I live in an apartment with a set of stairs.
Hmm.
And when I get a break, I go out and I do double steps and work those glutes. And, they
I
have,
got to do that. I
and
only live on the fourth floor, so I just kind of like, yeah,
but
I
I'm
should
like,
do.
that's a weak spot for me. Or I keep a kettlebell at my bike fit studio. And when I have a break between clients, I'll swing the kettlebell a little
There
bit.
you go. Yeah.
And so I have these little bits of exercise throughout the day, which I think metabolically is really good too. It's not focused and programmed, but that's okay. I'm moving my
That's
body.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to me about periodization and how we
Mhm.
fit that all into the scheme of a seasonal sport, for example.
Yeah. So a seasonal I'll talk in relation to endurance athletes, because what's funny is like when I was studying for my CSCS, and when you're learning about strength training and you're learning about periodization, it talks about linear periodization. That's basically the only style of periodization that you learn about at the beginning, and it's where you go from high volume low intensity to low volume high intensity eventually, and then you peak at that point, and that's when, okay, but the fact of the matter is that like most athletes besides endurance athletes, they need to peak for like 4 months,
Right.
at the very least, so um that doesn't really work as well when it comes to those like 4 months. And then it depends, like if you're running, and I do say that to endurance athletes when they plan to run or they plan to ride plenty of different races within a season standpoint. But
Mhm.
most of the time I'm working with somebody who's building up to like one big race, so in that case I really do like linear periodization, and I do think it's valued a lot because you are working up to the point where you're peaking for like one day. And why we do that, and what's a little bit confusing about that, is people see like 3 sets of 12, or they see 3 sets of 15 or 3 sets of 20, and they're like, whoa, like that's a lot of volume,
Right.
like that's crazy. And I say, well, that's because you're doing it at the beginning when you're farther away out from the race. That's what makes sense. What doesn't really make sense to a lot of people is why they're doing heavy weights when they're about to end, like short volume and low volume when
Mhm.
they're about to go run for a long time. So they see like large volume should go with large volume. And what
Yeah.
really is the case is that it needs to flip. So when we are training for a long endurance race, we start out with the high volume, low intensity, because we're really trying to build your body's ability to withstand endurance through weights. That's called strength endurance.
Right.
And then we slowly move into the low volume, higher intensity. And so it kind of slowly, slowly, slowly moves over the course of however long you have to train. And then sometimes when I put people in those, when people are in like a longer season of running race after race, every however many weeks, or riding race after race however many weeks, I do something called undulating periodization, where you're kind of going up and down between the high volume and the low volume so that they can slowly increase and peak at the end. But the waves do this a little
Right.
bit.
Well, and that's how we program, when I look at a race season for, let's just say, a runner. you may have a whole bunch of training races because you like to race and you like having the
Yeah.
motivation of an event. And maybe, and we'll call those your C races. And maybe you have some events that are kind of important to you and you'd like to do well, but you're still not the most important event. And so those are my B
Right.
races. And I might have a mini taper for that. But then, of course, there's my important races, the A races,
Right.
right?
Right.
And there might be one or
Right.
two of
There's
those. If I have two peaks in my season, I'm doing something
Yeah, I
crazy.
always have to talk people off of a ledge, like for their B races or their C races, like the things that aren't as important. And I was like, okay, like you're gonna lift this week, you'll be
Yeah.
okay. You know what I mean? And it'll be
It's
fine.
the
Yeah,
same thing with our cycling clients. I have clients who are going to race, and it's like I still give them short workouts, high intensity, keep them fresh, but don't want them fatigued. I don't want to accumulate too much fatigue. And
exactly. Yeah,
one of my clients who's new to racing this year, he was like, I didn't think you knew what you were talking about. And he got his first podium ever in many years of
wow.
racing. And it was like he came back and he's like, it all made sense now. He's like, you've got
Yeah,
to be race ready. And I was like, yeah, we built you up, we broke you down, we got you ready.
right,
So
right.
the time is
Those
so
strength
hard though.
endurance workouts,
Yeah.
though they're lighter weights, they're fatigued. I mean, they're very fatiguing. Like, and I think people will notice once they really start to, listen to their body and pay attention to how they feel the day after those strength endurance
Right.
workouts versus those high intensity workouts. If I do like 5 sets of 5 at a pretty high intensity for strength, I'm not feeling too bad the next day. Like, there's not that much soreness. There wasn't that much, there was breakdown, don't get me wrong, but it was very low volume versus the
Right.
3 by 12 with like 50% of intensity. The next day I'm dying. Like I can't sit down. So you have to kind of learn and listen to your body, and it takes some trial and error.
It does. And I think one of the things that you were talking about fatigue, DOMS, that sense when we first start of so much muscle fatigue that 24 or 48 hours after that, I think a lot of people just get discouraged and they think it's always going to be that way. And so they're not going
Yeah.
to do strength training because, I mean, when I start a strength program, I feel like I can't even function.
Right. Right. And it's funny. I just had this conversation with the soccer girls yesterday. Their
Yeah.
season started last week, Expedition. They have their first game on Thursday. They come back early and they run a lot. You know what I mean? So it's obviously not the same, but it's similar to endurance running, and they're dying. Like their
Yeah.
hamstrings are sore, their quads are sore. They're doing 2 a days. They train for 2 hours in the morning. They train for 2 hours in the afternoon, and they can't for the life of them understand why they're coming to the weight room after training. And there's also, well, they understand. I shouldn't say they can't for the life of them understand, but like they do need a little bit of the explanation. And I say strength training is a form of recovery. Like you are pumping blood to the muscle, and it's actually, a lot of the research shows that your HRV can be elevated after strength training. My fiance always tells, he wears a Whoop and he's like, I'm in the green after I go to the gym. And he's a tennis dude. And I'm like, in recovery, it does. Obviously, the more muscle that you have that is built from strength training, the more recovered you can be, the more your metabolism runs. Like it's, don't get me started on the benefits, but like it
No, the
helps.
benefits are huge, right? Resiliency, injury prevention, increased strength and speed, and everything. Just
Yeah,
feeling better
I
and
would
moving
say
better
for
and
endurance
looking
athletes,
better.
endurance athletes don't really think about the injury prevention as much as they should, or sometimes they do, and that's great. But like, endurance athletes are strength training to prevent the injury. At the end of the day, these endurance athletes, you are doing the same motion over and over again, like we talked about. Your knees are pumping up and down, your hip flexors are flexing and extending and flexing and extending and flexing. Like, think about how many times they're doing that over
Mhm.
the course of that one race or that one training session.
Yeah.
And in order to really prevent your hip flexors from overworking, or your glutes from overworking, your hamstrings from overworking, you need to make them bulletproof. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so the bulletproofing doesn't just come from riding with resistance or riding up a hill or running up a hill. It comes from external load.
Yeah. So that brings me to another question. And this came from Karen Drucker, who's one of our Facebook members. She said she's interested in your opinion on the benefits of body weight strength training and Pilates in addition to lifting. So, how do bar, Pilates, that kind of
I put
exercise?
Pilates and bar in like a different category than
Okay.
body weight strength training, because like I do Pilates and I really see it as more of, well, first of all, the core benefit is beyond.
Right.
And Pilates does have external load a lot. I mean, if you're doing mat Pilates, maybe not, but like the reformer kind of
Oh, yeah.
big wave Pilates that's going through right now does have external load. So it is a form of strength training. What I will say is that in order for your muscles to grow, they need to be challenged. The same sense that, like, if you're riding, a 50-mile race and all you've ever trained for is the 50-mile race, you're going to get really good at the 50-mile race. And your body probably won't get better at doing something more than 50 miles or doing an uphill 50 miler because that's not what you trained for.
Right.
Same goes for any type of body weight stuff. If you are doing a body weight squat and that is what you primarily do as your squat, your body's going to get real good at a body weight squat. But then you hit the plateau of what you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
your muscles say, like, I'm not going to get stronger in this squat anymore unless you make it harder. And
So
so we make
progressive overload.
Correct. So we make it harder by implementing correct progressive overload. And again, progressive overload can come in the form of slowing down the tempo. It can come in the form of changing the stance that you're in the squat. It can come in many different ways, and it can come in volume and intensity and whatnot. But what really does build bone density and build muscle is putting that external load
Mhm.
on the body. So I love Pilates. I go to Pilates. Like, I look forward to the once a week that I can go and afford it. But I do it for stability because it's really great for stability, and I do it for really good core strength.
Right. Pelvic
And
floor, all of that.
I do it for some serious strength endurance because it is slow, and I am not a slow girl. So I do it.
Really? I'm like, did she have coffee this morning?
I had coffee. I'm just not a slow person. So I do it to, like, slow it down and really challenge myself in a different way, and I see it as like a recovery from strength training.
That's awesome. And I think it's important, right? Moving our body, moving in a bunch of different ways and challenging it. And that can also probably fall into, the breathing, the PT type exercise. That's what I did. I skipped PT and went to Pilates. And it was great. And it was
There
hard
you
as
go.
anything for me.
It's
Um,
hard.
it
It's
is.
so hard.
So I have another question for you. This is from Tom Gilday, also in the group. He says he has a question. We're told that we need to incorporate strength training into our exercise routine at least 2 to 3 times a week, but I've not been given any guidance on the intensity of the strength. Should we be lifting enough weight to do 3 sets of 10 to the point of muscle fatigue? So how do we think about, like, building muscle hypertrophy versus functional strength, and how do you?
It's It's a really good question. For so long, I told myself that I was like a functional strength trainer.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it was a
I've like
buzzword.
started, it's such a buzzword, and I've kind of started to hate it. Because, like, obviously, like, duh, it's functional. Like, any type of functional strength training is functional for what the person is doing. I just saw like
Uh,
a really interesting Instagram post about Noah Lyles
mhm.
and how, he's doing the same exercises as every other athlete in the world because it's functional to what he does, because those exercises, depending on how you load the exercises and program the exercises, are functional to that lifestyle. So whether you're like a stay-at-home mom of four who, like, needs to carry the groceries in, or whether you're training for a 50-mile race, you're still going to deadlift. You're obviously going to periodize it differently. So, but this question is a really good one because there's just so much information out there and people just really don't understand.
Right.
Hopefully the linear periodization thing obviously helps. And you think to yourself, as you're building up towards the race, you're going down in volume and high intensity as you build up towards that point and towards that peak. I would say if you're hanging on the 3x10 train for a long time, you need to get off.
Yeah.
You need to get off the bus. You need to get off the train. So I would say that's kind of where your body starts to plateau, and it doesn't do much more than train your strength endurance. And we don't just need strength endurance, we need hypertrophy, like you said. So when we're in that like 4x8 realm, 6 to 8 reps, 4 to 5 sets, we're in hypertrophy. And then we drop down below 6 sets. Below 6 reps, we're doing 1, 2, 3, 4 reps of something, which seems super short. But if the weight's heavy enough,
Hmm.
then it's actually going to really help build the strength in the muscle.
Right.
And so it's a little bit harder at home. And what we see a lot with our clients where they only have so many weights. You know what I mean? Like, I can't tell them, if they don't have a barbell and I can't test their 1 rep max or estimate their 1 rep max, I can't tell them, like, you should be doing 80% for 5 reps. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a little bit harder.
Hmm.
I usually love to tell people, like, the 2 for 2 rule, which is, I did not make up in any way, shape, or form. But if you're able to do 2 more reps at that weight, but
You
just
should.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, if you're able to do 2 sets in a row, I would say it's time to go up a little bit. But if
Okay.
those
That's a good
last
guideline.
yeah, if those last 2 reps feel good, and they feel heavy, and that last rep, it shouldn't be failure. You shouldn't really go to failure every single time. But if you feel like you've got like one left in the tank, two left in the tank, then that's fine. But if you could do two or more, it's time to go up.
Got it. That's a good guideline. It's
Yeah.
so as I think about our challenge groups, and
Yeah.
we are going into fall, which is typically endurance time in North America. Um,
Hmm.
so during our endurance training, we would do more muscular endurance strength training as well. So we would complement that. Is that true?
Yeah. At the beginning. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So at the beginning, yeah. So it moves a little bit. It's interesting when I've programmed the strength training for going along with the cycling
Yes.
challenges.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Well, I like just did it just now, actually, for the one in the fall. I right before I got on the phone with you. But I start with a little bit. Sometimes I start with lower volume because it's a barrier to entry. And the fact
Right.
of the matter is that if you're joining this challenge and you're not used to doing the challenge plus the strength training, then I start with a little bit lower volume because it's like an acclimatization phase, and then eventually we'll move to like the 4x6 stuff,
Right.
or the 5x5 we saw in the last challenge that I did. And so the 5x5, the 4x6, where I'm encouraging, where it says like go medium to heavy weights, that's kind of, towards the end of the challenge, towards the
Right.
seventh or eighth weeks. And then the beginning is where you see like the 3x10s, the 3x12s. Yeah.
So this summer when I was doing, so I programmed a climb challenge. We had 8 weeks there. So we would do very different type of strength work at that point. And then this last challenge, the sprint challenge, again, high intensity for our strength.
Yeah, a little. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it will build up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I always say it's never going to be like high intensity at the beginning. I'm not like
Okay.
dying. You'll in terms of the loads, it'll always say light to medium in the beginning because you
Ah,
are trying to build up to that point. By the
mhm.
seventh or eighth week, and generally in like the phase two, it's always a progression of what we did in phase one. So again, it's not always that you're increasing in intensity or you're increasing in load or you're increasing whatnot. Sometimes like I move from a pogo hop to a single leg pogo hop, or you move, so it's building in the progression of the actual exercise itself as well, whether it's just using one double or using two, or changing your stance to a split stance from a regular squat. So there's tons of like rhyme and reason to why it progresses the way it does, but I always want to progress the strength training as you progress the challenge.
Right. That makes sense. And it's been challenging. Like you and I have never met, and I'm programming the cycling, and you're programming the
Yeah.
strength, and it's like it magically just appears, and I'm like, okay, it's about time I meet Ava. That
Yeah,
one.
yeah, and typically, like, I really should I should take a look at the cycling challenge part of it. But John will give me like a little bit of insight, like this is
Exactly.
intended for this, or this is intended. We did that large half marathon challenge, and I ended up doing like 15 weeks of strength programming, and that was like very meticulously. We there was a 10-week peak and then another 5-week peak, and so
Right.
that's a little bit more meticulous. But in terms of like the 8 or 6 week challenges, I'm really just trying to build somebody up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And to the point where they end the challenge thinking like, oh, I can do like high intensity, low volume work in conjunction with my high intensity cycling, or in conjunction where you have this peak, and that's where I really should be. And getting people to understand the high intensity versus low volume while you're peaking is like kind of the key to success.
That's awesome. I'm going to chat about a couple things, and then I want you to think about one takeaway for us. So
Okay.
I'm going to go into the fall endurance challenge just as a quick teaser for everybody. As you know, we start August 26th, and registration is open. We're going to focus on rebuilding endurance, and so we'll go back to traditional FTP testing model. Um, a couple things that we're doing differently. We've got live rides with Matt. So on Saturdays, we're going to do live rides with Matt. For those of you not on the East Coast, we'll do some on-demand group rides. So we'll get together and ride together. The other thing we're going to add in is optional climb rides on Sundays. So we're still going to keep building that strength with the idea that we're going to peak at the end of 8 weeks for a big event. And that event might be Hincapi Grand Fondo in Greenville, which many of you, and Matt is going to ride. It might be Matt's birthday ride. So we've decided we're going to do some group rides, some optional group rides throughout the United States. We'll have more details on that soon. I think it'll be really fun. I'm secretly calling it Club Wilpers, and I don't know if Matt has approved that name yet, but the Club Wilpers ride in some key cities throughout the United States. Or you can go out and do your own event. You could do a 2-hour power zone endurance ride. You could do another. So our final week of the challenge will be a little different than we've done in the past, and we'll have some fun, exciting things to do.
Cool.
And just as a reminder, there is a 1 week bridge plan if you want to retest your FTP, but we will test it in the beginning of this challenge as well. So I'm pretty
I
excited.
should do that.
You should come ride with us. It's
I get on the
super fun.
Peloton like once a week and call it cardio.
Exactly. What were you saying about that? Right? 20
Cardio's
minutes a
rough
day.
for a strength girl.
I know. It's funny. I used to teach spin in the early 2000s, and I taught at a gym that was next to the Balcor Labs. And as you know, Barry Bonds trained at the gym where next to Balcor Labs, and he would come into my spin classes and make it for about 10 minutes or 15
Yeah.
minutes. All his
Yeah.
big guys.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, once he retired from his sport, he is in a relationship with a woman who used to be a pro cyclist and an Olympian, and he's now a cyclist, and he's pretty darn good, which is awesome. So yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
like me starting tennis.
right. But it's what I will say as an older athlete as well is I started running at 54, which
Did you
is
really? Wow.
I did, and I was actually pretty good. Well, I should say I actually am pretty good, although this year I'm focused on gravel racing and on the bike. But it gave me something new to do. And when you've been
Sure.
doing the same sport for more than 20 years, as I had,
Sure.
it starts to get stale. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
people say after a few years it gets stale.
Yeah.
But I've done all these various genres of cycling, and for me to run, it was like every time I ran, it was PR. I could compete in a new sport in an age group because there's not a lot of age group racing,
Right.
bike racing, and
Right.
I could run further, I could run faster, I could do
Right.
something different and learn. I then became a running coach as well, and it was invaluable to learn a second sport.
Right.
That was a great
Right. It's
experience.
That's why I honestly did the half marathon when I did it, because I was like, I know I can strength training. Like I strength train. I'm pretty good at this. Like I understand it. Like let's see if I can do something else. But I will always say that runners and cyclists are built to run and bike. They are
Yeah,
built like there is something in the pelvis, in the hips, and I'm
it's in
not
the
getting a
brain.
PhD. On record, I'm not getting a PhD, but I think what I would study if I did get a PhD is genuinely the anatomical differences
Mhm.
between somebody that just has it in them to run and
Yeah,
cycle long distance. Like you are either built for this or you are not. And I actually like tore a labrum slightly from doing that half marathon. I was like, my hips just like they weren't doing it. Like it wasn't going to happen. So for all the people that do it, you are amazing. You were
yeah.
born that way, and I give it to you.
But for those who weren't born that way, I do think you can train it. I
You can
definitely,
train.
yeah,
You can
maybe
train, but
not to
train
the
smart
Olympic
and hire
level.
a coach.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's one more point that I'll make as a takeaway for me is um, throughout this conversation, we've talked about coaches and trainers and strength coaches who have coaches themselves and who take classes themselves. And I think that's really important. We can get just so far with our own base of knowledge.
Totally.
Then when we
I
bring
have a strength
it
coach. I work with the strength coach at North Carolina. He writes programs for other coaches and other athletes,
yeah,
and he writes my programming. You know what I mean? It's you and I think if you're gonna say like, what's your takeaway? My takeaway really is, and this isn't just like a plug for us, though it might sound like it, is you wouldn't do a lot on your own without hiring a professional. When you think about like, I mean, I give it to the people that like do their plumbing and their oil changing by themselves. That's really wonderful. But I typically hire somebody and say the stuff on the apartment or the house or like fixing my car last week from the tires. Like that was something I hired a professional for because I recognize that they are the professional in that and I am not, and they should do it. So I think the same really goes for strength training and obviously really goes for coaching in general is hire a professional, and it doesn't need to be like this crazy financial investment. Oftentimes you can get a really good add-on deal for it, and maybe it's not like on Zoom every single day, or you're not going to their studio or going to their house. Maybe you're just following along the program. So
hmm
I think what people do is they try to do so much on their own by reading like so many articles. I give my dad a little bit of grief for this all the time. He just loves to read articles and like take everything with it. And there's so much information out there, but if you hire a good professional and you look at their credentials and you really do the research, you're going to find somebody that will ultimately make you better at your sport
yeah.
and improve your life. And so hiring that professional and really looking towards the professionals to do the strength training, I think is key.
Absolutely agree. I worked as a trainer for many years and also was a strength and conditioning coach, and I still work with other people because I don't want to think about it and I don't want to rack my own weights. I
Right.
basically, at the end
Right.
of the day, I don't want to put everything back. It saves time, it's efficient. But
I have always sometimes like I'll when I go back to visit New York, I'll go to Body Space again and like the owner Kelvin, I'll be like, I just need you to like put me through like a butt kicking workout. I
yeah,
just feel like it. And like he'll get the weights out for me and I'll be like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like,
and you can
there's
always learn
a benefit.
from other people. And I think that's, at the end of the day, one thing that you said was like, I have people work on my bikes. I take my bike to the bike shop. I'm trained as a mechanic, I'm certified. I could do it.
Right.
I don't want to do it. I don't do it often enough to be good at it without looking things up. I,
Sure.
and it's worth it to me. And
Yeah.
people see things in different ways, and I may not see my body in the same way that somebody else does. So having someone
Right.
who's unbiased, who can look at me and look at my weaknesses, and I don't want to admit my weaknesses, but
Yeah.
they're
If
going to tell me what they are.
somebody else watches a video of me squat, like my coach saw a video of me squat and he tore it up. Like tore it up. And
In
I
a
and my
loving way,
job is
right?
yeah, of course. Like, but my job is to tear it up for my athletes, you know? So like you always need the outlook of somebody else.
Yeah, I that's a great takeaway. And Ava, thank you so much for your time today. This
Thank
was really
you.
fun. Um,
Thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah, we'll post this on the Team Wilpers. Well, I think it'll post automatically on the Team Wilpers YouTube channel. So feel free
Awesome.
to share it with whomever you want. And
I
thank you
will.
again for all the work that you do to keep our challenges running. It's awesome. If
Thank
folks
you.
are
My pleasure.
in learning more about Ava, you can go to the Team Wilpers website and learn all you need to know. So
Yeah.
awesome.
I might join the challenge. We'll see.
You should. We're super fun. We have a great group.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Yes.